He's the baddie who got his super soldier chocolate in his tech-suited peanut butter, and Peter Parker's life has never been the same. You know, Norman Osborn is something of a scientist as well, which honestly is an understatement. He's a straight-up mad scientist with a double pump on the mad. While Venom might get all the attention these days, Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin was #1 on the Spidey Haters Club list, all the way back to 1964 before it was cool. Nah, it was always cool. Aside from his cool glider, pumpkin bombs, and literal bag of tricks, he's also gone the armor route to catch the menace Spider-Man with varying degrees of power added. It might not be immediately obvious, but early on, Marvel heroes and villains had more of a thing for chainmail than you'd think. If it seems like depictions of Captain America look like he's covered in fish scales, it's actually a special kind of chainmail that protects America's super soldier. Which makes sense because, Norman is a bit of a super soldier himself. The pursuit of the elusive super soldier magic that created Captain America has led to increasingly gruesome results across the Marvel Universe. In Osborn's case, it was to give him an edge against the rise of superpowered folk in his attempt to consolidate power via the underworld because giant corporation power wasn't enough. The suit itself was a modified version of what Oscorp was working on for regular soldiers. Outside the chainmail, it had limited features. There was a pair of jet boots for distance where the Goblin glider would be too much. For the weapon, we're all gonna have to agree to be adults for the next 10 seconds. The gloves had finger blasters that would shoot out electricity. Alright, get it out of your system. While not every Marvel cartoon adaptation has been a home run, one of the more consistent successes they've had adapting their characters to animation has been Spider-Man, dating all the way back to the 1967 show that gave us one of the best superhero theme songs ever. Since then, he's had Amazing Friends, hung out with Fox Kids, was spectacular. Every generation since the 1967 series has had their own iconic Spider-Man animated show. The 2010s brought the world Ultimate Spider-Man, with a Peter Parker who took assignments from S.H.I.E.L.D. and teamed up with the likes of Power Man and Iron Fist, Nova, and White Tiger. While we're still a few years away from Spidey joining the MCU, he was always dead center of his own MCU-esque shared universe. Keeping with the MCU aesthetic, S.H.I.E.L.D. was at the center of much of the action. This resulted in Norman Osborn getting his armor by swiping it from a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, as well as his Goblin glider. This suit was a little more robustly armored, moving the blasters to the slightly less giggle-inducing palms instead of fingers, and included a containment for Spider Totem DNA, because it turns out some version of Spider-Man is important to every reality. Depending on who you talk to, the insistence by the studio to include a wish list of characters in Spider-Man 3 meant that we never got a Spider-Man 4. The reboot, Amazing Spider-Man, seemed to want to test that premise by stuffing its second installment with villains, even trying to jam the Green Goblin's Gwen Stacy moment into a movie that had, up to that point, been about Electro. Also, Rhino was there, kinda. The Green Goblin skipped straight to the son, Harry Osborn, as both father and son were dying. In this case, the Goblin formula was an attempt to stave off the disease. When that didn't work, young Osborn donned a suit that boosted healing and enhanced physical abilities. This time his visage came thanks to a poorly made Goblin formula. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man will forever be perhaps the most picture-perfect rendition of Spider-Man we'll ever get. Rosemary Harris looks so much like Aunt May from the comics, you'd think she was the inspiration, like the Ultimate Nick Fury drew inspiration from the man who would eventually play him, Samuel Jackson. There were two exceptions. One was that Peter now had organic web shooters that shot out of his wrists. The other was that the Green Goblin got a suit of armor, unfavorably compared by some to the Power Rangers. Makeup testing from pre-production showed us that we could have had a really cool articulated Goblin mask, but instead we got the fixed helmet of the movie, with Willem Dafoe's crazy eyes peeking out from inside. This suit acted more like power armor than a traditional Green Goblin suit, but Osborn was still partaking of the crazy juice and yelling at himself in mirrors. One of the Green Goblin's most remarkable feats was to actually stay dead for a long time. Not an easy thing to do in comics. During the Dirt Nap hiatus, though, he had no shortage of fans willing to give the Goblin armor a fresh coat of paint and go about menacing Spider-Man. A number of people have taken up the mantle of Hobgoblin, including Peter Parker's MCU bestie, Ned Leeds. But it was the son of Marvel's most tireless news reporter, Ben Urich, Phil Urich, that took the Goblin armor up a notch with a mask that created a chemical reaction with the Goblin formula in Phil's blood. Disney Plus subscribers are now getting introduced to Uatu the Watcher. and how he spends his downtime treating Earth like an interdimensional cable box, taking viewers down a path where one key decision was changed. Like maybe Tony turns around the Q ship and regroups with the rest of the Avengers, and makes a stand with them in Wakanda, where Thanos wouldn't have already grabbed the Time Stone and turned up the dial on Wanda's sadness. Just saying. The mainstay of a lot of what-ifs is the idea of one hero actually being a different hero. Like, what if Peter Parker became the Punisher? After all, both Peter and Frank Castle lost loved ones to criminal violence. In this world, to deal with the more gun-friendly Spider-Man, the armor was reactive, redirecting the kinetic energy of the bullet outward. Peter's Punisher bypassed the protection by punching through 3 projectiles with precision and persistence. Another Green Goblin spin-off who took theatrics and hating Spider-Man to new levels was Jack-o'-lantern. Old Jack swapped out the Goblin head with a pumpkin head doused in a stage fire for extra creepy effect. It also has telescopic infrared capabilities, as well as a 3-hour oxygen supply and cooling system. Because, it's on fire the whole time. The armor is a little more intense as well, mixing metal and Kevlar plating, making it capable of absorbing a 7-pound bazooka shot. For all those bazooka-themed superheroes. Marvel's 2099, or Earth 928, if you want to be specific, is the Marvel Universe 100 years later, with old faces retired and people putting a new coat of paint on old names, like Jennifer D'Angelo taking her spin as Goblin 2099. She was the sister to the then current Spider-Man's fiancé, but that wasn't their connection. She just hated Spider-Man on her own, and was hoping to supplant him in the hearts of New Yorkers by suggesting that Spider-Man was a corporate shrill. Her suit came with some future upgrades like gliderless flight, invisibility, and the ability to project hallucinations. Wouldn't it be great if we could all do what a spider can? That was essentially the premise behind the Spider Island event that saw most of New York get into that Spider-Man life. Unfortunately, not all of New York got a bit of sage wisdom from a beloved uncle right before his death, which drove the point home. So there were markedly less friendly neighborhood Spider-Men, and rather more unfriendly ones. Once Jackal started handing out Spider-Man costumes, even the real Spider-Man had to stand down so that the others could fight the surge of Spider-Folk without worrying about getting the real one by accident. The being behind this all, the Spider Queen, got a second go at her Spider Island concept thanks to the Beyonder in 2015's Secret Wars. This time around, she had disabled Stark tech, so Tony took his Mach 42 armor and mixed it with the still functioning Osborn tech of the Green Goblin suit, becoming the Iron Goblin. Mixing mad science with slightly less mad science. The difference is the amount of cackling that happens in the building process. If you're hung up on semantics pointing out that this is a Tony Stark thing more than a Green Goblin thing, Osborn still has you covered. The nefarious ne'er-do-well managed to get a public perception upgrade after the Secret Invasion, where he outed key Skrull spies and imposters. He parlayed that rejuvenated reputation into a leadership position at the newly reconstructed S.H.I.E.L.D., where he did the most evil thing he's ever done outside of dropping Gwen Stacy. He renamed S.H.I.E.L.D. with the acronym HAMMER, and didn't tell anybody what the acronym stood for. So evil. Once in charge, the supervillain who didn't even join the efforts of most of the Sinister Six got the club bug and started forming all sorts of teams. There was the Cabal, a sort of supervillainy counterpart to the Illuminati, then his own version of the Avengers that more or less appeared like a unlicensed knockoff of the supervillains in their spot, like that Midday Wednesday show that's all understudies, but it's the only way you can actually afford to see the show. With his newfound access, Osborn helped himself to some Stark tech and then gave the suit a star-spangled paint job, becoming the Iron Patriot. Even more than the Iron Goblin outfit, the abilities leaned more into a discount version of Iron Man than a hopped-up version of Green Goblin. The crazy thing is, despite Peter being buddies with Norman Osborn's son Harry, there wasn't any special reason for Osborn to hate Spider-Man. He just chose Spider-Man as the best opponent to raise his profile. When Spider-Man proved not to be a pushover, a classic hate-hate relationship for the ages was born.